The woman's screams were swallowed by the howling wind as she collapsed against the frozen trunk of a pine tree, her water-soaked skirts already stiffening in the brutal cold. Beatrice Kingston had been traveling alone from Sacramento to Columbia, California, foolishly believing she could reach her sister before the baby came. But the November blizzard of 1876 had other plans. Her horse had thrown her miles back when lightning split the sky, bolting into the white emptiness and leaving her stranded in the Sierra Nevada foothills with nothing but the clothes on her back and the child demanding to be born. The contractions had started an hour ago, coming faster now, each one tearing through her body like a knife while snow piled around her knees, and the temperature dropped with the fading daylight. She had no matches, no flint, no way to start a fire even if her frozen fingers could manage it. The wagon she had been following had disappeared over the ridge hours before the storm hit, and she had veered off the trail trying to find shelter. Now she was utterly alone, 23 years old and about to die giving birth in a blizzard. Her husband Thomas had been dead for 4 months, killed in a mining accident in Nevada, never knowing she carried his child. She had sold everything to make this journey west to her sister's home, to start over, to give this baby a chance at life. Another contraction seized her, and Beatrice bit down on her leather glove to keep from screaming. She could not afford to waste energy on screaming. The wind was already stealing the warmth from her body, and she knew with terrifying certainty that if she did not find shelter soon, both she and her baby would freeze to death within hours. She forced herself forward, stumbling through snowdrifts that reached her thighs, searching desperately for an overhang, a cave, anything to break the wind. There. Through the swirling white, she spotted a fallen tree, its massive trunk creating a small pocket of space beneath where the roots had torn free from the earth. It was not much, but it was something. Beatrice crawled into the hollow, pulling pine branches down around the opening to block some of the wind. Her dress was soaked through, her shawl useless, but she wedged herself into the tightest position possible and tried to preserve what little heat remained in her body. The baby was coming whether she was ready or not. Another contraction gripped her, stronger this time, and Beatrice knew she had no choice but to deliver this child here now, in the frozen darkness with no help and no hope. She prayed, words tumbling from her blue lips in desperate whispers, begging God for mercy, for a miracle, for anything that might save her baby's life. Hours passed in a blur of pain and cold. Beatrice lost track of time, lost track of everything except the primal need to push, to bring this child into the world even as that world tried to kill them both. When the baby finally came, sliding into her trembling hands in a rush of blood and fluid, Beatrice barely had the strength to pull the infant up to her chest. A boy. She had a son. He was not crying. Panic gave her a surge of strength, and she rubbed his tiny back frantically, clearing his nose and mouth with her fingers. Finally, blessedly, he let out a weak wail and Beatrice sobbed with relief. But the relief was short-lived. Her son was already turning blue, his cries weakening in the brutal cold. She tucked him inside her dress against her skin, trying to share what little warmth she had left, but she could feel herself fading. The cold was insidious, making her drowsy, making her want to close her eyes and sleep. She could not sleep. If she slept, they would both die. Beatrice forced her eyes open, forced herself to stay conscious, but it was becoming harder with each passing minute. Her body was shutting down, conserving what little heat remained for her vital organs, abandoning her extremities to the cold. She could no longer feel her feet or her hands. The baby's cries had stopped, and she pressed her ear against his tiny chest, terrified, but she could still feel his heartbeat, faint but steady. The wind howled like a living thing, and snow continued to fall in thick, heavy flakes. Beatrice tried to sing to her son, tried to keep herself awake with the sound of her own voice, but the words came out slurred and confused. She was dying. She knew it with absolute certainty. But maybe, just maybe, if she could keep her baby warm enough, if she could hold on long enough, someone would find him in the morning. She did not hear the horse approaching through the storm. She did not hear the man calling out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. She only became aware of another presence when strong hands suddenly gripped her shoulders, and a deep voice said urgently, "Madam! Madam, can you hear me?" Beatrice tried to respond, but her lips would not form words. She clutched her baby tighter, some primitive instinct telling her to protect him even though she could not see clearly anymore, could not tell if this stranger was friend or foe. "Jesus Christ," the man breathed, and then he was moving fast and efficient. "I have got you. I have got you both. Hold on." She felt herself being lifted, felt the man wrap something warm and heavy around her, a coat or blanket. Then she was moving, being carried through the snow, and she wanted to tell him to be careful with the baby, but darkness was pulling at her, dragging her down into unconsciousness. Benjamin Parker had been tracking a lost steer when the blizzard hit, and he had been trying to make his way back to his ranch for the past 3 hours. He knew these mountains like the back of his hand, had lived in the foothills outside Columbia for nearly 10 years, but even he had nearly gotten turned around in the whiteout conditions. He was cold, tired, and furious with himself for being caught out in this weather, but at least he had his horse and his heavy winter gear. When he heard the faint sound of a baby crying, he thought the storm was playing tricks on him. But his horse had pricked its ears forward, sensing something, and Benjamin had learned long ago to trust his animal's instincts. He had dismounted and searched on foot, and what he found in that hollow beneath the fallen tree had stopped his heart. A woman, frozen nearly solid, clutching a newborn infant to her chest, both of them blue with cold, barely alive. Benjamin did not waste time with questions. He wrapped them both in his thick wool coat, then stripped off his own flannel shirt and wrapped the baby in that as well before tucking the infant back against the woman's skin. He lifted them both as gently as possible and carried them to his horse, which was standing patient and solid despite the storm. The ranch was still 2 miles away, too far in these conditions with 2 people on the verge of freezing to death. But Benjamin knew there was a lined shack less than a mile to the east, a small cabin he and his ranch hands used during spring roundup. If he could get them there, get them warm, they might have a chance. He mounted his horse carefully, settling the woman in front of him, holding her and the baby secure against his chest. His body heat would help, but it would not be enough. They needed shelter, dry clothes, and fire, and they needed it fast. Benjamin urged his horse forward, trusting the animal to find the way through the blinding snow. The ride felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 20 minutes. When the dark shape of the lined shack finally appeared through the storm, Benjamin nearly wept with relief. He dismounted quickly, kicked the door open with his boot, and carried the woman and baby inside. The cabin was small, just one room with a wood stove, a narrow bunk, and a few supplies kept stored in a trunk. Benjamin laid the woman on the bunk, then moved with practiced efficiency. He had the wood stove going within minutes, using the kindling and logs stored in a box beside it, feeding the fire until it roared to life and heat began to fill the small space. The woman was unconscious, her breathing shallow and rapid. The baby was making weak mewling sounds, not quite cries, and Benjamin knew that was a bad sign. Hypothermia killed fast, especially in infants. He needed to warm them both, and he needed to do it carefully. Too fast, and he could send them into shock. He pulled blankets from the trunk, 3 thick wool blankets that smelled of cedar and mothballs. He stripped off the woman's wet clothes, trying to preserve her modesty as best he could while knowing that her life depended on getting her dry and warm. Her lips were blue, her skin like ice, and she did not stir as he worked. He wrapped her in 2 of the blankets, then turned his attention to the baby. The infant was a boy, tiny and perfect and terrifyingly still. Benjamin had helped deliver foals and calves, but he had never held a human baby before, and his large, calloused hands felt clumsy as he stripped away the wet fabric and examined the child. The umbilical cord was still attached, tied off crudely with what looked like a strip of fabric torn from the woman's petticoat. She had done that herself, Benjamin realized. She had given birth alone in that frozen hellhole, cut her own baby's cord, and somehow kept him alive long enough for Benjamin to find them. He wrapped the baby in the 3rd blanket, then made a decision. The woman was unconscious and could not nurse. The baby needed warmth, immediate and constant. Benjamin stripped off his wet outer layers down to his undershirt, then carefully tucked the baby against his bare chest, holding the infant's skin to skin the way he had seen ranch wives do with premature lambs. He pulled his undershirt over the baby to create a pouch, then wrapped another blanket around them both. The baby's skin was so cold it almost burned to touch, but Benjamin could feel a faint heartbeat against his ribs. He sat on the floor beside the stove, feeding more wood into the fire, holding the infant close and willing warmth back into that tiny body. "Come on, little man," he murmured. "Come on. You have already survived this much. Do not give up now." Minutes passed. The cabin grew warmer. Benjamin kept checking the woman's breathing, kept feeding the fire, kept holding the baby close. And slowly, impossibly, the infant's skin began to feel less like ice. Color started to return to the tiny face, a faint flush of pink replacing the terrifying blue, and then the baby cried. Not the weak mewling from before, but a real cry, strong and indignant, and Benjamin laughed out loud with relief. The sound was loud in the small cabin, startling even himself, but he did not care. The baby was alive, truly alive. He checked the woman again, and this time he found her breathing had deepened, become more regular. Her skin was still too pale, but it was no longer that awful blue-white color. She was alive too. They had both survived. Benjamin settled in for a long night. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and even if it did, he would not risk moving either of them until he was certain they were stable. He kept the fire burning hot, kept the baby tucked against his chest, and kept watch over the woman who had fought so hard to keep her child alive. It was near dawn when she finally stirred. Benjamin had dozed off sitting up, his back against the wall, the baby still nestled against his chest. He woke instantly when he heard her make a sound, a soft whimper of confusion. "Easy," he said quietly. "You are safe. You are both safe." Her eyes opened, and even in the dim light of the dying fire, Benjamin could see they were a striking blue-green, like the color of the river in summer. She looked around wildly, panic flashing across her face, and then she tried to sit up. "My baby," she gasped. "Where is my baby?" "Right here," Benjamin assured her quickly, carefully pulling back the blanket so she could see the infant sleeping peacefully against his chest. "He is fine. He is warm and sleeping." The relief that washed over her face was so intense it was almost painful to witness. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she reached out with a trembling hand toward the baby. Benjamin shifted closer, letting her touch the infant's tiny head, letting her reassure herself that her son was truly alive. "How?" she whispered. "How did you find us?" "Heard the baby crying," Benjamin said simply. I was heading back to my ranch when the storm hit. I have a place about 2 miles from here. This is a line shack, a shelter we keep stocked for situations like this. You saved our lives." Her voice broke on the words. "We were dying. I could feel it. I thought we were going to die out there." "You did not die," Benjamin said firmly. "You are both going to be fine, but you need to rest. You have been through hell and back." She nodded, but her eyes were still fixed on the baby as if she could not quite believe he was real. "Can I hold him?" Benjamin carefully extracted the infant from his makeshift pouch and handed him over. The baby stirred but did not wake, and the woman gathered him to her chest with a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She pulled down the blanket enough to tuck the baby against her skin, and Benjamin politely turned his attention to the fire, feeding more wood into the stove. "I am Beatrice," she said after a moment. "Beatrice Kingston. This is my son. I have not named him yet." "Benjamin Parker," he replied. "Folks call me Ben. I own a cattle ranch in the valley about 5 miles outside of Columbia." "Columbia," she repeated. "That is where I was trying to get to. My sister lives there. Eleanor Mackenzie. Do you know her?" Benjamin shook his head. "I do not spend much time in town. But we will get word to her once the storm clears. Is your husband out looking for you?" The flash of pain across Beatrice's face told him he had asked the wrong question. "My husband is dead," she said quietly. "Mining accident 4 months back. I was traveling to stay with my sister. I thought I had more time before the baby came, but I was wrong." "I am sorry," Benjamin said, and he meant it. The West was full of widows and orphans, lives cut short by accident and violence and simple bad luck. That must have been a hard journey to make alone. "I hired a wagon to take me from Sacramento," Beatrice explained. "But I was not feeling well yesterday morning and I could not keep up the pace. The wagon master said I could rest at the back, but when the storm hit, I got separated somehow. My horse threw me, and then the contractions started." She shuddered at the memory. "I have never been so scared in my life." "You were incredibly brave," Benjamin said, and he meant that too. "What you did, keeping that baby alive in those conditions that took more strength than most people have." Beatrice looked down at her son, and a small smile touched her lips. "I did not have a choice. I had to keep him alive. He is all I have left of Thomas." They fell silent for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind still howling outside. Benjamin made coffee with the supplies in the cabin, strong and black, and convinced Beatrice to drink some. She needed to stay hydrated, and she would need her strength when the baby woke hungry. As if on cue, the infant began to stir, making small grunting sounds that quickly escalated to cries. Beatrice shifted uncomfortably, and Benjamin realized the problem. "I will step outside," he said, grabbing his coat. "You will freeze," Beatrice protested. "I will stand on the porch out of the wind," Benjamin assured her. "Just call when you are ready." He did stand on the small covered porch, breathing in the cold morning air and giving Beatrice privacy to nurse her son. The storm had finally broken, and the world was transformed into a landscape of white, pristine, and deadly beautiful. The snow had to be 3 feet deep in places, and Benjamin knew it would take most of the day to make it back to his ranch, even with the weather cleared. When Beatrice called him back inside, he found her looking more alert, though still pale and drawn. The baby was nursing contentedly, and Benjamin noticed that even the infant looked healthier now, his skin a healthy pink instead of the terrifying blue from the night before. "I have been thinking," Beatrice said as Benjamin settled back by the fire. "I have no money to repay you for what you have done. I sold everything to make this trip, and whatever I had left is gone with my horse and bags." "I do not want your money," Benjamin said, perhaps more sharply than he intended. "I am not the kind of man who charges a woman for saving her life." "I did not mean to offend you," Beatrice said quickly. "I just meant that I owe you a debt I can never repay. You and your family must think me terribly foolish for traveling alone in my condition." "I do not have a family," Benjamin said. "I mean, I have ranch hands but no wife, no children. It is just me and the cattle and the horses." Beatrice looked surprised. "How long have you had your ranch?" "10 years now," Benjamin said. "I came out here in '66, worked as a hired hand for a few years, saved every penny and bought my own land. It is not much, but it is mine." "That is something to be proud of," Beatrice said. "Owning your own land is the dream, is it not? That is why people come west." "It is hard work," Benjamin admitted, "but yes, it is mine. No one can take that away from me." They talked through the morning as Beatrice regained her strength and the baby slept peacefully. Benjamin learned that she had grown up in St. Louis, had married Thomas Kingston when she was 19, and had followed him west to Nevada when he caught gold fever. The marriage had been happy but short, cut off by the cave in that killed Thomas and 3 other men. Benjamin found himself telling Beatrice things he rarely spoke about his own childhood in Pennsylvania, about the war he had fought in as a young man, about the restlessness that had driven him west to start over. There was something about this woman, bruised and exhausted but still fighting, that made him want to open up in ways he normally never did. By afternoon, Benjamin judged them both strong enough to attempt the journey to his ranch. He had spare clothes in the cabin, work shirts and trousers meant for the ranch hands, and though they were far too large for Beatrice, they were dry and warm. She dressed in layers while Benjamin looked away, and he fashioned a sling from a blanket to help her carry the baby against her chest. The journey was slow and difficult, with Benjamin leading his horse through the deep snow and Beatrice riding while holding tight to her son. But the sun was shining now, bright and almost painfully beautiful against the white landscape, and they made steady progress. When the ranch house finally came into view, a sturdy 2-story structure of timber and stone, Beatrice let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for hours. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, taking in the barn, the corrals, the outbuildings. "With help," Benjamin said. "But yes, I designed it, chose this spot. The land here is good, plenty of water, good grazing." He helped her down from the horse and led her inside. The house was neat but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture and few personal touches. Benjamin realized suddenly how empty it must seem to someone like Beatrice, someone who had probably made a real home wherever she lived. "It is not much," he started to say, but Beatrice shook her head. "It is warm and dry and safe," she said firmly. "Right now, that makes it the most beautiful place in the world." Benjamin showed her to his bedroom, the only proper bed in the house, and insisted she take it. He would sleep in the bunkhouse with his ranch hands, he said, or on the sofa downstairs. Beatrice protested, but she was swaying on her feet with exhaustion, and Benjamin would not hear another word. He left her to rest and went to find his foreman, a grizzled man named Jack who had been running the ranch in Benjamin's absence. Jack took the news of Benjamin's rescue with typical Western stoicism, merely nodding and saying he would make sure the men knew there was a lady in the house and to mind their manners. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Beatrice rested and regained her strength while Benjamin ran his ranch, but he found himself making excuses to come back to the house more often than necessary. He would check if she needed anything, if the baby was doing well, if she was feeling better. And each time, he found himself staying longer, talking with Beatrice about everything and nothing. She was educated, he discovered, had attended a girls' school in St. Louis, and could read and write fluently. She loved books, missed having them, and her face lit up when Benjamin showed her the small collection he kept in a trunk in the parlor. They were mostly practical books, guides on ranching and animal husbandry, but there were a few novels mixed in, gifts from his mother back east that he had never quite gotten around to reading. Beatrice devoured them, reading by the fire in the evenings while Benjamin worked on his accounts or mended tack. It felt domestic in a way Benjamin had never experienced, and he found he liked it more than he wanted to admit. The baby, whom Beatrice had named Samuel Thomas Kingston after both his father and his grandfather, thrived. He was a healthy, hungry infant, and Beatrice bloomed with the joy of motherhood despite the hardship that had brought her to this place. Benjamin found himself fascinated by the child, by how small and perfect he was, by the way his tiny fingers would grip Benjamin's thumb when he held him. A week after Benjamin had found them in the blizzard, Jack drove the wagon into Columbia to find Eleanor Mackenzie and tell her that her sister was safe. The woman came back that same afternoon, tears streaming down her face, and threw her arms around Beatrice with such force that Benjamin worried she might hurt her. "I thought you were dead," Eleanor sobbed. "When you did not arrive and then the storm hit, I was sure you had frozen to death. I was planning to search for your body come spring." "I almost did die," Beatrice said, holding her sister close. "If not for Benjamin, Samuel and I would both be frozen in the snow right now." Eleanor turned to Benjamin with such gratitude in her eyes that he felt uncomfortable. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You gave me back my sister, you gave Samuel his life. Name your price, anything, and I will find a way to pay it." "There is no price," Benjamin said firmly. "I did what anyone would have done." "You did what a good man would do," Eleanor corrected gently. "And there are fewer of those than there should be." She invited Beatrice to come stay with her and her husband in Columbia immediately, and Benjamin expected Beatrice to agree. After all, she had been trying to reach her sister when disaster struck. But to his surprise, Beatrice hesitated. "Could I stay a few more days?" she asked, looking between Eleanor and Benjamin. "I know I am imposing terribly, but I am still regaining my strength and Samuel is so little. I would feel better waiting until he is a bit older before moving him again." Eleanor looked like she wanted to argue, but then she saw something in her sister's face that made her pause. "If that is what you want," she said slowly, "but you must promise to come to Sunday dinner. I want to show off my nephew." "I promise," Beatrice said. After Eleanor left, Benjamin found Beatrice standing by the window looking out at the mountains. "You did not have to stay," he said quietly. "Your sister clearly wants you with her." "I know," Beatrice said. "But I am not ready to leave yet. Is that strange?" "No," Benjamin said, and he realized it was the truth. "It is not strange at all." The days turned into weeks, and Beatrice remained at the ranch. She made herself useful, cooking meals for Benjamin and his ranch hands, mending clothes, bringing a woman's touch to the sparse house. Benjamin found himself looking forward to coming home each evening, to the smell of dinner cooking and the sound of Beatrice humming to Samuel. They talked constantly about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Benjamin told Beatrice about the loneliness of ranching alone, about how he had convinced himself he was content with his solitary life, but was beginning to realize he had just been too afraid to hope for more. Beatrice told him about her marriage to Thomas, about how she had loved him but also felt lost in his shadow, always following his dreams instead of finding her own. "I do not want to live like that again," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. Samuel was asleep in a basket beside them, and the house was quiet except for the crackling of the logs. "I want to be a partner, not just a wife who obeys. Is that terrible of me?" "No," Benjamin said. "I think it is honest. A ranch cannot run with just one person making all the decisions. It takes two people working together, trusting each other." Beatrice looked at him, and something in her eyes made Benjamin's heart race. "Is that how you would want a marriage to be?" she asked softly. "Yes," Benjamin said. "That is exactly how I would want it to be." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Benjamin knew he should say something more, should take the opening she was giving him, but fear held him back. What did he have to offer a woman like Beatrice? He was just a rancher, rough and uneducated compared to her. She deserved better than a hard life on a cattle ranch, but before he could retreat into his doubts, Beatrice spoke. "Benjamin, I need to tell you something. I think I am falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying. Benjamin stared at her, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "You do not have to say anything," Beatrice continued quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I know this is probably inappropriate. You saved my life, and I am imposing on your hospitality, and I have a baby and I am a widow, and you probably think I am being foolish." "Beatrice," Benjamin interrupted, and she fell silent, looking at him with wide eyes. "I think I am falling in love with you too. I have been for weeks now. I just did not know if I had the right to say it." The smile that broke across Beatrice's face was like the sun coming out after a storm. "You have every right," she said. "You have more right than anyone." Benjamin stood and crossed to where she sat, then knelt beside her chair so they were at eye level. "I am not a fancy man," he said. "I cannot offer you an easy life or fine things, but I can offer you a partnership, a home, and all the love I have to give. You and Samuel both." "That is all I want," Beatrice whispered. "That is everything." Benjamin kissed her then, gentle and careful as if she might break. But Beatrice kissed him back with a strength that belied her delicate appearance, her hands coming up to cup his face. And Benjamin felt something inside him unlock, a door he had kept closed for years swinging open at last. They married 6 weeks later in Columbia's small church, with Alina and her husband as witnesses and Samuel sleeping peacefully in Benjamin's arms through the whole ceremony. The town turned out for the wedding, curious about the romantic story of the cowboy who had saved the widow and her baby from the blizzard. Benjamin endured the attention for Beatrice's sake, but he was relieved when they finally returned to the ranch, to the quiet life they were building together. Beatrice transformed the house, adding curtains and rugs and small touches that made it feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. She kept the books, managing the ranch accounts with a skill that impressed Benjamin, and she rode out with him when Samuel was old enough to leave with Alina for a few hours. She learned to love the land the way Benjamin did, to understand the rhythms of ranch life, the hard work and the satisfaction that came with it. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler with his mother's blue-green eyes and his father's dark hair. Benjamin loved him as fiercely as if he were his own blood, and the boy called him Papa without any prompting, which never failed to make Benjamin's throat tight with emotion. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Beatrice gave Benjamin a daughter. They named her Caroline Alina Parker, and she was born in the big bed upstairs with the doctor from Columbia in attendance and Benjamin pacing holes in the parlor floor below. When he finally got to hold his daughter, Benjamin wept openly, overcome with gratitude for this life he had stumbled into. 3 years after that came another son, Michael Benjamin Parker, born during spring roundup, and announced to his father by Jack riding out to the range at a gallop, shouting that it was a boy and everyone was fine. Benjamin rode home so fast his horse was lathered, and when he burst into the bedroom and saw Beatrice holding their son, tired but smiling, he felt his heart might burst with joy. The ranch prospered. Benjamin's cattle business grew, and he gained a reputation as a fair dealer and a good boss. Men wanted to work for him, and other ranchers respected him. But more than any of that, Benjamin had a family. A wife who was his true partner, who challenged him and supported him and loved him with a fierceness that still took his breath away. Children who filled the house with laughter and chaos and love. On cold winter nights, Benjamin would sometimes stand at the window and look out at the mountains, at the snow falling soft and silent, and he would think about the blizzard that had brought Beatrice into his life. It had nearly killed her, nearly killed Samuel, but it had also been the beginning of everything that mattered. Beatrice would find him at those moments, slipping her hand into his, and she would know exactly what he was thinking. "I would go through it all again," she would say softly. "Every frozen, terrifying moment, if it meant ending up here with you." "You should not have had to suffer like that," Benjamin would always reply, the memory of how close he had come to losing her still sharp even years later. "Maybe not," Beatrice would agree. "But I did, and we survived, and we built something beautiful from it. That means something, Benjamin. That means everything." And Benjamin would pull her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against him, and he would know she was right. They had taken tragedy and transformed it into joy. They had taken near death and turned it into abundant life. Samuel grew tall and strong, with a gift for working with horses that made Benjamin proud. He never forgot that Thomas Kingston was his birth father, but he loved Benjamin as the father who had raised him, and that was enough for everyone. Caroline became a spirited, fearless girl who could ride as well as any of the ranch hands and had her mother's sharp mind for numbers. Michael was quieter, thoughtful, with a love for books that reminded Benjamin of Beatrice when he first met her. Eleanor's children grew up alongside the Parker children, cousins who were as close as siblings. The families spent every Sunday together, either in Columbia or at the ranch, and those gatherings were loud and chaotic, and filled with the kind of joy that comes from being surrounded by people you love. As the years passed, and Benjamin's hair turned gray and Beatrice's face gained the lines that came with age and laughter, they never lost the connection that had been forged in that blizzard. They had seen each other at the worst moment of their lives, had fought for survival together, and that bond ran deeper than most people ever experienced. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Beatrice back to the line shack where he had brought her that terrible night. It was still standing, still stocked with supplies for emergencies, but it looked smaller than he remembered, less significant. "This is where our life really started," Beatrice said, standing in the doorway and looking around the small space. "Right here in this little cabin." "I was so scared," Benjamin admitted. "I did not know if I could save you both. When I found you in that hollow, you were so cold and the baby was barely alive. I thought I was going to watch you both die." "But you did not give up," Beatrice said, turning to face him. "You fought for us, and you saved us, and then you gave us a life beyond anything I could have imagined." "We gave each other that life," Benjamin corrected. "You were the one who survived giving birth alone in a blizzard. You were the one who kept Samuel alive against impossible odds. You were the bravest person I had ever met, and you still are." Beatrice kissed him, and it felt the same as it had 20 years ago, full of promise and possibility and love. "We saved each other," she said. "That is the truth of it. You saved my life, and I saved you from a lonely existence. We were meant to find each other, Benjamin. I truly believe that." "So do I," Benjamin said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They rode back to the ranch together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The house was visible in the distance, lights glowing warm in the windows, and Benjamin knew that Samuel and Caroline and Michael would be there waiting, probably with half of Eleanor's family as well, ready to celebrate the anniversary with dinner and laughter and stories they had all heard 100 times before. It was a good life. No, it was better than good. It was the kind of life Benjamin had never dared to dream of, and he owed it all to a blizzard, to fate, to the courage of a woman who had refused to give up even when death seemed certain. As they rode into the yard and their children rushed out to greet them, Benjamin reached over and squeezed Beatrice's hand. She squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they had built together, everything they had survived, everything they still had to look forward to. The blizzard that had nearly killed them had instead become the foundation of a love story that would last until their final days. And in the end, that was the greatest miracle of all. Not just survival, but the ability to transform suffering into joy, fear into love, and a single night of terror into a lifetime of happiness. Years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. The children grew and eventually began families of their own. Samuel married a sweet woman named Martha from Sacramento and took over running the day-to-day operations of the ranch, his skill and dedication making Benjamin proud every single day. Caroline, true to her independent spirit, married a schoolteacher and opened a school in Columbia, determined to bring education to every child in the county regardless of their family's ability to pay. Michael went east to study law, but he came home every summer and eventually opened a practice in Columbia, becoming the advocate for miners and ranch hands who needed someone to stand up for their rights. Benjamin and Beatrice became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their house always full of children running through the halls, hiding in the barn, learning to ride horses under their grandfather's patient instruction. Every child heard the story of how Grandma Beatrice had survived the blizzard, how Grandpa Benjamin had saved her and baby Samuel, how their love had grown from that terrible night into something beautiful and enduring. On quiet evenings, Benjamin and Beatrice would sit on the porch they had added to the house years ago, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing the way they had since the beginning. Their hands would find each other automatically, fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice, and they would sit in comfortable silence, needing no words to communicate the depth of their love. "You ever regret it?" Benjamin asked one evening when they were both well into their 70s and the world had changed in ways they could never have imagined back in 1876. Taking a chance on a rough cowboy instead of finding someone more refined, someone who could have given you an easier life. Beatrice laughed, the sound still bright and full of joy despite her age. "Benjamin Parker, after all these years, you still doubt. I chose you because you were exactly who I needed. You are strong and kind and loyal, and you loved me when I had nothing to offer but a newborn baby and a past full of grief. How could I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure you have been happy," Benjamin said. "That is all I have ever wanted." "I have been happier than I ever thought possible," Beatrice said firmly. "When I was lying in that hollow, freezing to death, I prayed for a miracle. I asked God to save my baby even if it meant I had to die. But instead, God sent me you and you saved us both. And then you gave me a life full of love and purpose and joy. How could I be anything but grateful?" Benjamin pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder the way she had done countless times over the decades. They sat like that until the stars came out, bright and clear in the mountain sky, the same stars that had been shining the night Benjamin found Beatrice in the blizzard. When Benjamin Parker died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Beatrice held his hand and whispered that she would see him again soon, that their story was not ending but simply pausing. She told him she loved him, that he had been the great adventure of her life, that she would carry him in her heart until they were reunited. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see Caroline's youngest daughter graduate from the very school her mother had founded, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild, long enough to know that the legacy she and Benjamin had built would continue for generations. And when Beatrice finally closed her eyes for the last time, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she went with a smile on her face, ready to rejoin the man who had saved her life and given her a love that had lasted beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But the real monument to their love was not made of stone. It was the thriving ranch that Samuel and his children continued to run, the school that bore Caroline's name, the legal practice that Michael had built on principles of fairness and justice, and the dozens of descendants who carried their blood and their values forward into the future. The story of the blizzard, of the woman who gave birth alone in the frozen wilderness, and the cowboy who saved her, became a legend in Colombia. Parents told it to their children as a reminder that miracles could happen even in the darkest moments, that love could grow from tragedy, that courage and kindness could overcome any obstacle. And on cold winter nights, when the snow fell thick and silent over the California mountains, people would look out their windows and remember Beatrice and Benjamin Parker, and they would hold their loved ones a little closer, grateful for the warmth and safety and love that made life worth living. The lined shack where Benjamin had taken Beatrice still stood a century later, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors would come to see it, to stand in that small space and imagine what it must have been like, to marvel at the strength and courage it had taken for two people to survive that night and build a life together. But the real story was not about survival. It was about what came after. It was about choosing to love when love seemed impossible, about building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy, about two souls finding each other against all odds and holding on tight through every storm that followed. It was about a woman who refused to give up even when death seemed certain, and a man who rode through a blizzard and found not just someone to save, but someone to love. It was about a baby born in the worst possible circumstances who grew up surrounded by love and went on to build his own legacy. It was about family and partnership, and the quiet, everyday miracles that make up a life well lived. And it was about knowing with absolute certainty that some meetings are not chance but destiny, that some loves are not fleeting but eternal, and that the hardest moments of our lives can become the foundation for our greatest joys if we are brave enough to keep fighting, keep hoping, and keep believing in the possibility of happiness, even when it seems impossible. That was the true story of Beatrice and Benjamin Parker, the widow and the cowboy, the mother and the father, the partners who built a life together from nothing but courage and love, and an unwavering faith in each other. And it was a story that would be told and retold for generations, inspiring others to believe in miracles, to take chances on love, and to remember that even the coldest winter eventually gives way to spring.